In this segment of You Got Math, we're going to be covering ship energy levels and all the ways to tweak your ship to have the best performance that you can possibly have. Now, before we actually get into the nitty-gritty, the math, I want to give you a little bit of an overview. We've already covered this in our ship tutorials earlier, but I just want to cover it again because some people don't even understand that they can change their ship energy levels. If you go down here to your ship energy level UI, there's a few buttons across the top. These are just change your energy levels for you. And they're really simple: attack, defense, speed, and balanced. But right next to that is a fancy little button that when you click it, Type 1 is the default that it starts with. Type 2 will give you an actual visual presentation of your power levels. Type 3 is the same as 2, but it's also completely customizable, and it adds a couple buttons here. One of them is to save your preset, and the other one is to reset back to the default preset. These will be handy if you decide that you want to tweak your power settings. You need to do it from the third setting. All right, so let's move into what the actual energy does for you. Left to right, we'll just go right down the line. Weapon energy will affect your energy weapon's damage output. Notice I only said energy weapons. These don't affect projectile weapon damage done. But if your weapon system ever reaches 0, you can't launch torpedoes or mines. Your shield energy affects only your shield regeneration rate. There were some misconceptions earlier on that it also affected your total amount of shields, but it's really nothing but your regen. Your engine energy affects your movement speed, and your auxiliary energy affects, get this, hull repair, turn rate, stealth detection, and the power and or duration of many different science-y type abilities. Again, we're going to go right down the line here and tell you what, in the fine details, in the math, each of these do for you. Right about now, folks, you're going to be seeing a chart. It's fancy. I made it myself. Love it. This is an explanation of what the power levels do for your energy weapons. What this basically boils down to is that every point of power above or below a setting of 50 equals a 2% damage difference. Now, this again only affects the power of the weapon when it leaves your ship. Every energy weapon is also affected by the distance between you and your target. So even if you're always running at the same power level, you're going to see a variance in the actual damage that you do to your target based on distance. You're also going to see a variance in your damage because each time you fire an energy weapon, it drains just a little bit of your weapon power. The amount of drain depends on the type of weapon you're firing and the number of weapons firing simultaneously. So watch your weapon power level during combat and make sure you're not overdraining your weapon power. If you dip too far below what you actually have it set at on a regular basis, you'll actually end up doing less DPS because you have too many weapons. I know that seems a little counterintuitive. You think more guns, bigger guns mean more damage, but if you run out of power, then you're basically throwing rocks out your windows at them. So if your power is dipping really low on a regular basis, try replacing some of your heavy power drain weapons with ones that drain less power. Which ones are those? Well, let me tell you. All cannons and all beams drain 10 power per shot, but there's a catch to that. Beams fire much faster than cannons, so all beams end up draining more weapon power than cannons. Heavy cannons actually end up draining less over the long run because they fire fewer shot in bigger bursts. Turrets only drain 8 power per shot, but they're also 360 degrees. They actually end up drawing more power than a cannon does, even though it's less per shot because they're always firing. Now, you can offset the drain of these energy weapons by investing in EPS flow regulators. That's an engineering console. If you find yourself in a situation where you like the weapons you have, but they're draining too much power, then make sure that you have abilities like emergency power to weapons or a red matter capacitor or just a plain old weapon battery. Because again, if your power drops too low, you're not doing the damage that you think you're doing. Okay, let's move on to the shield system. Now, you should be seeing another pretty chart that I put together right here. The bottom line of this pretty little chart is that each difference in your energy level, up or down, above or below 50, will equal a 4% difference in your total percentage of regeneration for your shields. Now, I actually didn't know this till I started doing my homework on this. I thought that at 25% there was still something there, but no, it's nothing. If your shield power is only at 25%, your shields will never regenerate. See, one of the reasons that I didn't know this is because unlike weapons, shield tooltips and the regeneration rate listed on them do not update on the fly. Moving on to the system that keeps us moving on, the engine system. Now, the math to figure out your exact speed based on the amount of energy that you put into your engines is actually very complicated, very involved, and I didn't feel like typing it out or making a pretty chart. So there. That being said, it is true that your energy level directly impacts your speeds. However, there are also other factors that will always figure into it. A 0 engine power will always cause you to stop, and this is important to note, it cuts your turn rate down to almost nothing. Also, each ship type, whether it be an escort or a cruiser or a science ship for the Fed side, but every ship has a basic what they call an impulse modifier. The Klingon ships are a little more nebulous. They're not so clearly defined. These are listed in the shipyard consoles at the shipyards. Basically, this is a modifier that affects the engines you have equipped. So an escort and a science ship with the same engine will actually go different speeds. Your maximum bonus that you can get out of your engine energy is normalized and controlled by the tier of your ship. But I would also like to note that engine power has no effect on your warp speed when you're traveling in sector space. And that brings us to the final of the 4 systems associated with every starship, auxiliary. What is auxiliary? Well, it's everything else, basically. It controls your turn rate, your hull repair, stealth detection, science abilities, the color of your unicorns, everything. But let me just cover a few of the things that it actually does. Your turn rate, well, actually, just like engine speed, it's extremely complicated, but here's a few quick things about it that you can just keep in mind. I'm not going to do all of the math for you because you don't need to. If you know these general tips, then you can figure out the rest. 0 aux power will cause you to almost completely be unable to turn. Since your engine system will probably still be online, you'll just keep going in a straight line. Your turn rate is always calculated in degrees per second. Now that's based on 360 degrees in a circle, and it's unaffected by your engine speed. But if you recall, when we discussed on a previous You Got Math, the faster you're going, the bigger of an arc you'll end up doing. Whereas if you're turning slowly, you'll make a tighter circle. You're still turning at the same rate. It's just the amount of space that you have to travel to actually get around. Now, the total possible bonus of a high aux power level is never going to turn a cruiser into an escort in terms of maneuverability. They don't have the power. But by the same token, escorts will always benefit far more from auxiliary in terms of maneuverability due to their higher innate turn rate. It's actually a multiplier of the base. So that's all I've got on turn rate. Like I said, it's very complicated. So we'll just move on to the next thing that auxiliary has any control over, and that is hull repair. The calculations for this are actually totally unknown. I'm sorry, I couldn't find any math. I couldn't find any guesses. All I have is basically the variables that it's based upon. It's based on your auxiliary power, obviously. It's also based on your crew level, and it's based on some of the passive captain skills. And then there's, of course, investing in each individual ship type. Now, the longer the battle, the more hull repair will matter. So if you're going up against a big ship that you think is going to take you a long time to kill, like maybe a tactical cube, might be a good idea to put it into auxiliary if you're coming under fire, because basically every percentage of hull that you repair is like an extra percentage worth of hit points. Now, speaking of percentages, hull repair is always based on a percentage of your total hull. So even if you invest in a very high hull rate for your ship, let's say you have a cruiser with massive armor and you've got all the skills that make your hull very large, you're not nerfing yourself by doing that, because your repair rate will always be based on a percentage of your overall hull points. Now, what about stealth detection? Well, that is also affected by your auxiliary level. Basically, escorts and cruisers are about 1/3 as effective as a science ship at finding stealth ships. Now, you can improve that by upping your aux levels, but again, because it's a multiplier of the base, science ships are always going to be better at the same level of auxiliary power. But there are other stats that you can invest in that might help you find things. There are starship operations training, starship sensors, and starship sensor array. Now, those are both from items and from the skills. Now, as for the effect that auxiliary has on several different, primarily science type abilities, that's actually determined on a per ability basis. I'm not going to go through every single power in the game, but I can give you a couple little tips. It's always going to affect either the duration or the magnitude. And by magnitude, I mean like in a tachyon beam, it'll increase the amount of shield drain per tick. However, there are also abilities that are not affected by auxiliary at all, even though you would expect them to be. To check this, the tooltips will update on the fly as you shift around your auxiliary powers. So just have the power up, change your power levels, and see if the numbers change. Now, I know that I didn't cover everything here because ship energy is actually a gigantic topic. There are others out there that have done a much better job of looking into the actual effect that these things have on your gameplay ability. One of those is a WordPress blog that many of the more hardcore math fans have probably already found on their own. It's called The Engines Can't Take It. I'm going to plug him right here because at least half of the information that you just heard in the math segment was assisted by the research that he's done on his blog. So not only a nice big thanks to that dude over at The Engines Can't Take It, but you can thank him as well. You can also go over there and find those complicated calculations regarding auxiliary turning rate and engine speed that I didn't list here. They're very involved, but if you would like to read up on those, that's where you can do it. So in closing, now that you know exactly what each of these individual energy types do for you, go play around with your energy levels, determine the best way that you run your ship, and if you have any specific feedback you'd like to give to me regarding this math segment, send it to jeremy@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And we'll see you next time for another segment of You Got Math.